Hello, everyone. I'm the person who made the page. Okay, so we have a Michael Jordan fan who wants to go on. He's from YouTube. He goes by the YouTube username of Snake Plissken. He has Michael Jordan as a top 5 NBA player of all time, and he would like to explain why Michael Jordan is a top 5 NBA player of all time. So let me put him on. Hey, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and you're very welcome. Okay, so you have Michael Jordan as a top 5 NBA player of all time. Please feel free to explain if you like.
Well, I think his track record sort of speaks for itself, but yeah, I do have him as a top 5 of the time. It might be a weird number to put because most people have him as number 1. The reason I don't specifically say he's number 1 is because he can play against every player in the history of the NBA. So for me, I can't emphatically put him as number 1 because Bill Russell has more championships. Some players have scored more points than him, played more games, won more games. He's not necessarily the best player of all time in every category. Thus, I don't have him specifically as number 1. But for me, I do think he is top 5.
Okay, now you're able to recognize that it's essentially disrespectful to put him as the number 1 NBA player of all time. So, isn't there a contradiction if you're not recognizing that it's disrespectful to put him as the number 2 NBA player of all time, or number 3 NBA player of all time, or number 4 NBA player of all time, or number 5 NBA player of all time?
So you're saying because I have him above others, because at number 5, but it's possibly disrespectful to everyone I'd ranked below him?
In other words, because you're recognizing that, look, it's disrespectful if you put him as the number 1 guy over everybody else, but why not apply the same logic that you're putting him in the top 5, which is going to make him over most of the other, it's going to make him higher over most of the other NBA stars?
That's what you're saying. Okay, the reason I have a distinction here between the two is I think within Jordan's era, I think he was the best player.
How would you define How would you define his era?
His era would be when he played, when he began his career. And of course, he was not winning at the very beginning of his career, as everybody knows. And after 5 seasons, he started to win and dominate the NBA.
So his era would be 1984 all the way to 2003 or something?
Well, I would say 85 to 98. I don't really count his Wizards years. He just kind of came back to play around, basically, and sell tickets. So I don't really count that. But, because he wasn't even playing for 3 of the years, and then he comes back. He's old. He didn't have a team. I don't really count that. But for me, I would say there was 85 to 98.
But then you have a little bit of inconsistency. If you're saying his era is when he played, which isn't a thing that you're making up. You're saying that's his era. But okay, fine. I get your point. He played during those years.
Yeah.
You're not even counting all his years.
Yeah, I don't count the years when he's 30 and he had already taken 3 years off. Just like with Magic Johnson. If someone says, what's the Magic Johnson era? I don't count his final year because he hadn't played in 4 years.
Okay, but that's...
he didn't play that,
Yeah, and I would disagree with you. I think you should include Magic Johnson's last year. But even if you don't, there is a difference with Magic Johnson because, he left because he had health problems, and then he came back for less than a year. In Michael Jordan's case, he left on his own terms, came back on his, and when he came back, he's played for more than 1 season, and he played, I think, pretty much for the whole season both times.
No, one of them was full season, one he missed.
Okay, fair enough.
But
Okay.
that's 1 full season.
Oh, how many in both seasons? Do you know? You don't have to give me an exact number. Can you give me an idea of how many games did he play in both seasons?
60 in one and 82 in the other.
Okay,
that was the final.
Okay, so 60. So that's what I figured. So actually, I'm not wrong because 60 is still a pretty complete season. There's lots of players who are NBA stars today and in the past, and they play about 60 games a season.
I would consider players that only play 60 games that have had injury problems, though.
Yeah, you're probably right. But players have injuries. Lots of players have injuries, right? You don't just eliminate those seasons.
No, but I would say I usually don't count them in terms of like this is what their peak is. You know what I mean? So if a guy's only played 40 games, you think, okay, was he hobbled some of the games? You don't really. I don't discredit people's seasons if they've missed a bunch of games. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. So a couple of things you want to consider then. If you're not going by all the games they played, you're going by whatever you want. This is your own random criteria. And the second thing is, even if you say, well, look, I want to go by their peak years, there's a difference between saying, I'm going to go by his era versus I'm going to go by his peak years. Those are two different things.
Well, I see, again, like I said, it's not a random criteria. For any player, if they're old, I don't really count them not doing as well against them.
What do you define as old?
You know, they're past their prime, they're in their late 30s, so to speak.
Okay, so you can be in your late 30s and still dominate the game. But if you have your own definition of what you think is old, then again, you're having your own random criteria of what you think is old. But even if you're right, let's say you're right, and you have a legit definition of what counts as old, again, there is a difference between saying you're going by a player's era versus a player's peak years.
Well, again, see, I think you're kind of like trying to pick at this particular aspect because, you know, everybody kind of discounts the Wizards years. So it's a kind of low-hanging fruit for you, I believe.
Then you're believing wrong. I'm only going by what you bring up. If you would have brought something else up, I would have gone over that. And you did bring up other things, and I was going to get into those things too. But this is one of the things that you brought up, so I'm addressing it. And I think that's a little bit questionable for you to say that I'm doing a low-hanging fruit that's easy for me to pick at.
On the Wizards, yeah. So I think, to me, his era is when he's on the Bulls.
Well, hang on, but let me just finish what I was saying. I'm not doing a low-hanging fruit. I'm going to go over any point that you bring up. Now, some points I may not get to for practicality because we're going over different things, but I'm going to go by what you bring up. And it's not just, I'm not doing this because it's a low-hanging fruit or it's easy for me to pick at. No, I'm doing this because I find it questionable. Some of your takes are questionable. So I think I could say to you now, I think it's easy for you to say that I'm doing this as a low-hanging fruit or just because it's easy to pick at because you're not able to prove why you're right and I'm wrong then.
Well, that's the thing is when you just asked me to define what I thought is error. I'm not saying that I'm right or that you're wrong. You just asked me what my definition of what is error was.
Right.
And to me, when he begins the NBA to when he retires in 98, and the reason I don't count the Wizards years is he had not played for 3 years. He comes back, and it's not with the team that he built up. It was just with a random team. And he was old, was not himself. He got injured in the first year. I don't really count it as much. Yeah,
that's okay. You can count whatever you want. But I think if you're going to count whatever you want to count, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone going, you're counting the years that you want to count. And again, remember, as a reminder, there's a difference between saying I'm going by a player's era versus I'm going by a player's peak years. There's a difference there.
Okay, I'll tell you why this is my opinion. I'll give you some other players as examples. And this is not something that I'm kind of like redefining to fit Jordan. It's like if any player happens to get older and decline, I'll give, Kobe Bryant, this happened with him, with Dirk too. I don't consider it to be Dirk's era anymore, or the Kobe era. When they're clearly in decline, they're not doing as well as they used to. To me, that's just, I don't really count that as much. However, conversely, if there's a player, such as LeBron is a good example, where he's had a long career, or he is playing pretty well into his late years, I do count them because he's still doing well. And that gives credit to him. And I don't discount those years because he's old. He gets credit for still being well and having that longevity and the health to be able to continue doing it. So I give him credit for that. But I won't count, like, if a player's hurt and he's just not doing as well. It's like, I don't like when people will say, well, look at Tim Duncan late in his career. He wasn't as good. This is just who he is. Well, he was old and he was hurt, but he was still playing and doing what he could. I don't consider that to be like, this is what Tim Duncan is now. It's like,
Right, but again, but you're gonna have some problems here. It's gonna be how do you however you want to put it. How do you define an era? How do you define someone's peak years? How do you define when someone counts as being old, or how do you define when someone is not as good as they are? One great example I'll give you: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the late '80s. You could say these weren't his peak years. He's older. He's not as good as he is. It's not his era, and yet he was still considered by many people to be the number one NBA player in the NBA, to be the best player on the Lakers. He was considered the captain, and he won the NBA Finals MVP award.
Well, that's the thing. I'm glad you brought Kareem up, because remember when we talked about who would be in the top five? He's the guy that I would say is the best argument. As if you were to say who's the GOAT, he's up there too. Kareem is definitely in my top five. So he's the guy, and it's because of his longevity is one of the reasons I would have him there. So I'm glad you brought him up, because I feel like he's one of the more overlooked greats of all time, Kareem specifically.
Yes, you're right. Kareem definitely has a case over Michael Jordan, but he's not the only guy. A lot of other people have a case over him. What was that?
I was going to say, I agree with you, and there's 4 players, I think, that have a case.
At least.
As better than Jordan. Yeah.
At least 4, yes. There's more, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right.
Opinion, but for me, there's 4.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an opinion. I would say it's more of a claim. But it's not an opinion. There's definitely players who actually are better overall players than Michael Jordan, meaning there's more than 4. But back to the Kareem thing, yeah. So you're agreeing about the. It seems like you're agreeing on my whole take on Kareem. So what about that?
Okay, so the take on Kareem. This is what I was saying earlier when I said with Jordan, I discounted his later years because again, retired for 3. Kareem didn't. Now this is an interesting thing here. If you also brought this up earlier about the peak years versus era, and this is why I would say that there's players like. LeBron's another one, by the way, too, just like Kareem, where they didn't have that, their peak years, you could say, are significantly longer than, say, Michael Jordan. And this is where you can make that case, say, okay, well, how can you say Jordan's better than these guys? Because Kareem, LeBron, for example, they've had a career where they were dominant and an extreme force in the NBA for 15-plus years. Potentially, depending on your opinion, 15-plus years. Whereas Jordan, he was only really dominant for about 8.
I don't know, man. He seemed pretty dominant every season he was in the NBA. And I'm not exactly someone who's like a cheerleader for Michael Jordan, but he was he was dominant every year. How do you define dominance?
Okay, well, this is what I was looking up. I know people don't know this because we had a brief phone call before getting on the podcast. So I wanted to look up some stats specifically for this. Do you mind if I bring this up?
Yeah, sure. But just in the meantime, so how do you define dominance?
Okay, so for me, dominant is there's several aspects to this. One, how well are you performing within your team to bring them to a high total of wins? That's number one. And you could say that a team thing, a team achievement, but it's also obviously to get there, players have to be good.
No, you're going to have lots of holes in that argument. I won't go over every reason just to give you enough time to follow up, but just to give you here 4. That way you don't get too many and too little. No matter how good number one, you could straight up be the best player in the NBA and lose every game. Number 2, you could be an average player and win or lose. Number 3, you can be a not so good player and win. And number 4, there's plenty of examples of when these things actually happen. It is a team game.
That's what I said. It's within the construct of a team. And as far as players that are... See, actually, I disagree with you on one thing. That you could be the best player in the league and lose every game. When has that happened?
When has that happened?
When has it happened?
Well, no, I'm not saying. Yeah, what I meant was. Let me clarify. What I clarify, that hasn't happened, obviously. But it is. It is possible for you to dominate in the whole game in points, rebounds, steals, everything, and you could lose the game. And you can lose 2 games, and you can lose 3 games, and so on.
Granted, but over the course of time, the best players, if you look at their career records, that's never happened to any of them.
And that's not because of them necessarily. They play a role, yes, but that's because of their team. One of the best examples I'll give you is the guy that we're talking about, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan dominated. Some of his best years were in the 1980s, and he didn't win. Now, granted, I know we're talking about winning a game, but it's the same logic. If you lose one game, you can lose two, you can lose three, and so on. No matter how good you are, no matter how bad you are, no matter how much of an average player you are, or whatever, at the end of the day, a guy doesn't win and lose. It's a team that wins and loses.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But like I said, you asked me what was the original question. I'm kind of like I was going to give you one of the.
No, but I think the question was, how do you define dominance?
Okay, that's right. Okay, so let's finish this conversation, please, about this particular thing. So this is one of several things within the context. So you can. I understand your point that if you're very good, it doesn't necessarily translate into, having 60 wins or something, for example. But I can also point out to many examples where if you have a team who is doing poorly, and then they draft one player, adding to the team, don't change the team, and suddenly they win an extra 40 games.
There has never been a team in any team sport, baseball, football, hockey, or whatever, where the team was 100% exactly the same the next year.
Well, yeah, because they just drafted a guy and added that to the team.
I'm not even talking about that. That's obviously an obvious example. I'm talking about the rest of the team. And even if you found some mythical team that was exactly the same the year before they drafted a player, and then they were the same when they drafted a player, the players themselves are not the same. And then you have the coaching staff that's not the same. And other factors come into play. There's no team where it's not like a video game where you say, okay, let me simulate the season and see how is a team going to be without this guy and then versus with that guy. It's never happened like that.
I think that's when you take when you made the roster point, I could give many examples as there has been the same roster, but when you go the extra mile, and you say that, well, even if it is the same player, it's not the same. I mean, that's kind of a wishy-washy stance, though, in my opinion.
No, it's not wishy-washy because nothing stays the same, man. Players get older, they get injured, they lose motivation to play, they don't get along with their teammates, they don't like the new system, they don't like the coaches, they miss being home. I could give you more examples, but you get the point. You can't analyze a year-by-year thing and act like it's 100% the same. Again, you said you had some examples. I don't think there's ever been an example where it's been 100% the same. But even if you have some, I don't think it's wishy-washy to make the point that the teams are not the same.
That's my point. I can never give you, obviously I can't quote-unquote prove that every player is going to play at the exact, peak that they did the year before. I mean, there's no way to quantify that. But the problem with that stance I have is that you're discrediting then you're using that opinion, that stance, as a way to discredit the fact that if a player is added to a team that has not had a roster change, you could say that if they do improve in record by a significant amount, that it doesn't mean anything.
Okay, number one, it's not an opinion. It's not an opinion. It's a claim. Number two, it's not that I'm discrediting them. You're taking it the wrong way. I'm not elevating them as high as you are. You're actually discrediting the teams and other star players when you elevate a star and act like he made such a difference on the team because they did better because of him only, and that's it. You're discrediting other stars when you rank that star over other stars, and you're discrediting teams and owners and coaches.
Well, I think this is definitely something we disagree. I don't think I'm discrediting people to say that adding a talent that helps elevate a team to a greater height of wins, things that I'm discrediting the players that were there.
Oh, that's true. No, I agree with you. You're not doing that. I'm not saying you're doing those things. The discredit becomes when you say, okay, look, this team is the same, and even if I accept that they're the same, and even if I accept everyone is the same the next year, okay, fine, we'll go with that. Now they got a new player, and now because they got this player, he made such a difference that he is now higher than another star or some other stars. What you're doing at that point is you're not being consistent if you want to talk about discrediting, because you are discrediting another star. You are also discrediting other stars. You're also discrediting the ownership, and you're also discrediting the coaching staff.
How am I discrediting the ownership, coaching staff, and other players to say that
Because everything when a team does good and gets better and improves and all that, it's a million pieces that come into play to make them all better. It's not a simple case of they added a star.
Well, I never made that point, though. My point is, when you add a talent who can coalesce with the team, this is, in fact, my original point here is, and this should be in the tape as well, where a player, within the context of his team, elevates them to create a lot of wins. I think that is what is one of the criteria, I would say, creates a dominant player. Now, it's also a team, and those players that are on the team, the role players included, can be also dominant forces on that team. And I've seen it many times where they'll have a guy who you've never heard of him, but then throughout the course of the season, it's like, man, this guy's pretty cool, actually, even though he's not scoring 25 points a game. Maybe he's only scoring 6 or 7 or 8. But you can notice this guy because within his role, he's very good. I don't discredit these guys. I love those guys.
Even if I accept that you can find examples where a guy came in and he's the reason, even if I accept that, which I don't, I can find you examples where a guy came in and they don't win as much, and I could find you examples when it's the same guy that you're going to bring up. Any guy you bring up where you say, here's an example, dude, where this guy came in and they started winning, I'm sure I could find seasons where that same guy was the leader and they didn't win as much.
That could be true, but then, as you said earlier, those players are not the same anymore.
Right.
Maybe they're older.
Right. So you can't, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have, if you're going to say to me that, if you're going to...
Wait a minute. I can't have it both ways because you're applying it in one situation. That means you have to apply it.
No, actually, no. I'm the one who's consistently, I'm saying it's always other factors. You're the one who's applying it in one situation. You're saying, yeah, I know it happens other times, but I also think there's times where it's on the guy.
Yeah. Like, I'll give you an example as to why this is different. And so you could say, if I give you an example of a player who, when added to a team, has made a huge difference versus then you can say, well, there's a time that he hasn't. I don't know if you could on some of these players, but if you could, it would be because at one point he was young and healthy, and at the other point he was towards the end of his career. Gets added to a team, he's old, he's not nearly...
Right. So you're showing me that you know other variables come into play. I agree with you. Maybe not literally with every star. An example can be found like that. I'm not saying that. You can always find some exception to the rule. But at the end of the day, whether it's an exception to the rule or whether it's something that happened for whatever reason or reasons, at the end of the day, it is going to be a collective effort. It's not an individual game. It is a team game. And if you're going to say to me that, look, I can show you examples of when it's the star, you're not considering other factors. You're just putting it on the star.
No, that was never my intention. You were asking me what makes a player dominant. One of my criteria was that they're winning. And yes, that is part of it. It is a team game as well, but I said that as a given too.
No, you did say that. You did say that. I agree with you, but that's not the only thing you said. You're also painting a picture. When I asked you the question about how do you define dominance, you're showing me some reason or reasons, and one of your criteria is, look, here's a team before they got a star, and here's how they are after a star. That's not the way to analyze it. It's a collective effort. It's a team game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily discrediting my point or making it not as good, though.
Let's try this. If think of some star that you are thinking in your mind that when they drafted him, he made such a big difference. If that team was playing 5-on-4, or had a coach that wasn't there, or they had some personality conflicts that they didn't get along, or something. Can't you understand how maybe they might not do as well?
That's a possibility, yeah.
Okay, so then if you recognize other variables come into play, you're going to have to be consistent. Either you're going to say, hey, it's a group thing and that's it, or you're going to say it's not a group thing, it's the star. You can't have it both ways.
I'm not asking it both ways. All of that is a factor, but just as those things are a factor, another factor is maybe the team doesn't have a lot of talent on it, and they need to add talent to become a good team. Because I don't think any team can magically be a very good team with every player they have on it magically being able to compete with everyone else. That's just, not a thing.
Right, I agree with you. In fact, I'll even add on to that. You could have the best team in the NBA, and that doesn't mean they're going to win a ring.
Or the Brooklyn Nets.
Whoever you think is the best team in the NBA. So we're in agreement. So I'm not sure what the disagreement is. You know it's a collective effort, so why put it on a star?
What do you mean putting? You were asking what makes a player dominant. One of the criteria for making a dominant player is they have to be winning.
Well, that's one of your criteria, and I'm disagreeing with your criteria.
One of the criteria to me that would say this player is dominant is that his impact on the game is leading to wins.
How many Hall of Fame players in their prime don't impact their team in a positive way?
I don't think that affects what I'm saying, because their criteria to put someone in the Hall of Fame might not necessarily be what mine would be.
So again, you're going by whatever you like. But having said that, let's say you're right, and let's say some people who are in the Hall of Fame may not fit the bill of who you think should be in the Hall of Fame. Let me rephrase the question. Whoever you think is Hall of Fame worthy, when it comes to those guys, how do you know how many of those guys can you think of that didn't affect their team in a positive way?
I don't think I would have anybody in the Hall of Fame that didn't affect their team in a positive way.
Okay, so then there you go. That's my point. So they all affect their team in a positive way. Now, if you're going to say, well, some players affect their team in a positive way more than others, yeah, you're probably right on that, but then other factors come into play. How are their teammates? How is their coaching staff? What's the system? And there are more examples, but you get the point. But at the end of the day, they all are going to affect their team in a positive way. If they don't win, it could be a number of reasons, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily their fault if they don't win, and it's not because of them that they won.
I agree with that specific premise, but I also want to say that I don't think it's healthy to having a good logical argument to make an excuse for players who aren't winning a lot of games because of all these other things to be an issue. The fact of the matter is, if a player is the type of player whose talent is good and he does not have bad off-the-court issues, and he's a good team player, and he's coachable, and he works well with others, that's going to lead to wins.
You are not only assuming it's going to lead to wins, that is an assumption, you're ignoring all the other factors which I thought you agreed with, but even if you're right, which you're not, but you're playing both sides of the fence. You on the one hand, you say, okay, I know it's a collective effort, I know other factors come into play, I know other variables are there and all that, and then you say, well, if they don't win and all the check boxes are supposedly there, which is supposedly, but let's just say they're all checked, you're assuming they're supposed to win now, and you're saying he should be blamed if they don't, and then you say anyone who doesn't agree is making an excuse for the player? That's not logical.
I never said that he should be blamed if he doesn't win. I said, and as for it is making an excuse, my argument there is, if there's a player who, for his entire career, has a losing record, that's kind of an indictment on the player. No. Sure, there's other factors, but if you're supposed to be a Hall of Fame player, your argument is that this player is one of the best players of all time, and yet he doesn't have wins, well, during those seasons where he wasn't winning, there's probably a problem there.
A couple of things. I know you didn't use the words blame him. I know you didn't say that. But that's essentially going to be your argument, because if you're putting it on a star for winning, or if you're pointing the finger at him because he didn't win, then you are blaming him. And when you say to me, anybody who doesn't, I'm not trying to quote your exact words, so don't quote me, but when you say something like someone's making an excuse for that player not winning, you are blaming him. And again, you're playing both sides of the fence here. You're saying you know it's a group thing, but then you're saying, well, if he didn't win, blame him.
Well, the thing here is we're talking about two different things. That's why it seems like I'm playing two sides, because you keep changing the subject. The subject. No,
I'm not changing the subject. I'm addressing what you say. You're just not proving your case. I'm not changing the subject. I'm going by what you bring up.
The subject is what makes a player dominant. I don't think a player is dominant if he doesn't win games.
How does one guy win a game?
If a player is very dominant and he's not winning, again, you don't like, you don't think Jordan's rated very high. This is also an indictment on him in his early years.
It's
You
not.
can be
It's not an
very
It's
good,
not an
but it
indictment.
doesn't
I'm
mean
not
you can win.
elevating as high as you do. It's not an indictment. You don't have to take it like I'm taking away something he earned. He didn't earn something that you're giving to him. You're elevating him higher than he should be. If you're going to say that I'm changing the
Like,
argument,
well, Brandon, how did you
let me make sure I understand the argument. So there's a misunderstanding. I asked you what defines dominance, what's your criteria, and you explained your reasoning. And one of your reasoning, or maybe this was your only one at the time, was how a guy wins and loses. You say you know it's a group thing, but you keep acting like a guy wins and loses. I mean, you said earlier his record. What do you mean his
Yeah.
record? He doesn't have a record. It's a team game.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you examples. For example, in the early 2000s, there was a couple players who were very good, but just didn't win a lot of games. Allen Iverson's one. Tracy McGrady's another one, who I happen to really like, by the way. Gilbert Arenas. There's a bunch of guys I could name, but these are good players, but they're not, they just don't win.
Okay,
You know
so do you say Michael Jordan didn't win when he didn't win?
In the 80s, yeah, he didn't win very much either.
Okay, so are you going to blame him for that?
It's partially, yeah, it is partially.
What do you mean partially? No. You got to be consistent. If you're going to talk about Allen Iverson and Tracy McGrady and Gilbert Arenas and talk about players' records and talk about players making an impact and winning and losing, you got to be consistent if you want to be fair. Are you going to put it on Michael Jordan?
It is because my stance is not that the rest of the team doesn't matter. I never had that stance. Therefore, no one is ever entirely to blame. I think that would be a bipolar stance.
Well, then if you say that, wait, hang on. Hang on. If you're saying everything you're saying and you mean that, there's a contradiction when you talk about players' records.
There's not, though, because you're trying to put me in a box where I'm saying that only one thing matters. I've never had that stance.
I'm not putting you in any box. I'm trying to understand why you're painting yourself in this box, because if you say a player has records, it's wins and losses. You're putting it on them. This is your take.
I'm saying if a player is to be considered, in my opinion, to be dominant, they have to be their impact and production and their presence within the team has to lead the team to be winning the game.
Again, there's some problems here. Number one, it's not an opinion. First of all, it's a claim. Number two, if you're going to say to me there has to be winning, you're putting it on them to win and lose. And number three, how can you say on the one hand that you know other things come into play and you're not in that box, and then you say, hey, you got to put it on them for winning and losing? You're putting yourself in that box.
Well, the thing is this. If you have a star player that you spent your top draft pick on or you signed to a bunch of money, they're supposed to have more impact than the other players on the team unless they've also been a high pick or also have a high salary. So, yes, you do blame those people.
Okay, I don't. No, I don't. You do. I don't. You. And by the way, talk about disrespecting. Remember you were talking about. Remember you were talking about. I don't remember the exact word you used. You said something about disrespecting or dismissing players. When you rank players over other players because how a team does, you're disrespecting players because you're saying they're not good enough because their team didn't win.
When I said they're not good enough, I said they're not as good. If their talents...
That's the same thing. Not good enough. It's the same thing.
But that's different. No, it's not the same thing. You're saying not good enough. Good enough for what?
Obviously, I'm referring to when you rank one player over another player. Obviously, I'm...
If their career record is less than 500, I would say, yes, they're not good enough to be ranked above...
I thought you knew. Obviously, I'm referring to your point about one player being better than another player or other players. When you rank players over others, partly because of rings, you're not only disrespecting the players who lost, you're disrespecting their teams, you're disrespecting the ownership, you're disrespecting the coaches. You're putting it on them when it's not their fault. One guy cannot win and lose. And if you say to me they can impact their team to win and lose, if that's your take, how do you lead a team to win if the team wasn't good enough to win, or if they had injuries, or if they didn't have a good ownership? And there are more examples, but you get the point.
Well, for one, I never said that a player was somehow not good enough if they didn't win rings. I don't know where that came from.
No, you're still not getting me, man. I didn't say you said that. I clarified that, but go ahead.
You never said that. So I don't disrespect players or think players are not good if they don't happen to win a ring. To me, me, that's not a
All right,
criteria.
can I show you can I show you an example of how you're disrespecting? If you played basketball and you were the star on your team, and you played basketball against another team and they had a star, and you were the best player, no doubt about it, whatever your criteria is, but I don't care what your criteria is. Your criteria, you fit the bill caller, you were the best player in that game. Now your team loses against the other team. Does that mean that star is better than you?
No, but that's not the argument I'm making. You're talking about one game.
It's all one game. It all goes one game at a time.
I know, but one game. But then again, this goes back to no one ever goes 0-82 though.
No, but and no one ever goes 80. And no one ever goes 82-0.
Exactly. So I can outperform a star player and still lose. And then, one could say, but I'm not the type of person who would think, well, I did my part.
Okay, so do you think Michael Jordan, let's find out if you're consistent. I'm going to find out if you're consistent. Do you think there was ever a year in the 1980s that Michael Jordan was the best player in the NBA?
Yeah.
Okay. Did Michael Jordan ever win a ring in the NBA in the 1980s?
No.
Okay, so do you see the contradiction?
I do see the contradiction because that player had to win a ring to be considered the best player in the league.
No, but you're summarizing you're summarizing the whole thing together like one big porridge of stew that you mix. It's one game at a time, 1 year at a time.
Right, but again, if you have a player who every season is winning like 35 games, how much credence do you put
Well, now to your point, there's never been a season where every player won 35 games.
I'm saying a specific player that you consider to be very good, if he's always winning 35 to 40 games every year, how can you make an argument that they're still one of the best players in the league?
Because I'll tell you how you make the argument. Because you're mixing in individual accomplishment with team accomplishments. What you're doing is you're taking the what facts of what happened from a team accomplishment, and then you isolate the individual and you go, this guy is better than that guy, or this guy is better than those guys. It doesn't make any sense.
But how does it not? Because if you have a good player who joins a team, if you have like high leadership qualities and values, you do elevate the other players in the team. They might try under on defense.
Do you need me to give you a million examples of players who did those things and they didn't win a ring?
But again, I never said winning a ring is a criteria. You're throwing this in and everything.
Okay, well, no, dude, come on. When you talk about winning and losing, you're not talking about the preseason, are you? You're talking about winning and losing.
Talking about the season. The playoffs count too, but I'm not saying that you have to necessarily win the championship in a particular year. I've never made that argument.
So if you're not going by rings, then I really want to understand where you're going with this. So you're talking about who has the most wins and losses in the regular season?
No, I'm not saying that. You're like, you keep creating a straw man argument here. It's kind of getting a little bit irritating.
It's not a straw man. I'm answering your point. If you're getting irritated, it's because you're not able to prove that you're right and I'm wrong.
No. Let me finish my point. Stop interrupting me.
Well, but
okay?
that's not the first time that you've been a little bit negative. You had to be a little bit negative here and there. I was very nice to you. Every once in a while, you say something about low-hanging fruit, picking something that can be easier, straw manning. You keep coming at me. I've never done those things to you. Don't be mad because you're getting proven wrong.
So, for one, I never said that a player had to win a championship in a season for any particular criteria.
I know that. I know that.
Moving to that, I never said that.
I know that. You've already explained that. You explained that already. No, but you're telling me something we already clarified. You're telling.
And yet you made an argument as if I did say that.
No, I did. No, I made an argument about rings because you're talking about wins and losses. So I don't know why you don't want to count rings. But if you don't want to count rings, that's okay. If you're not going to count rings, that's okay. But I clarified, if you're not talking about rings, are you talking about wins and losses in the regular season? And I don't even know what is your stance.
Regular season and playoffs both. However, that does not mean that they have to have the best record in the NBA or have won the championship.
And I didn't say they have to have the best record in the NBA. Now you're creating a straw man. I never said that. But let me understand what you're saying. So if you're talking about wins and losses in the regular season and playoffs, why would you not count rings? I'm just curious.
I I'm not saying I'm not counting rings. I was talking about even.
So now you're saying you're not counting rings. So you are counting rings.
I'm not saying I'm not counting rings. I'm not talking about.
Relax. I'm listening. Relax. Just take it easy, man. So just let's instead of going by who said what and what happened, let's just clarify what your take is. So, are you going by rings or not?
That's not the be all end all.
Okay, my question to you was not, is rings your only criteria? I'm just asking, are you going by rings? Okay, fine, that's one of your things. So if you're going by rings, then I was not wrong to use rings as a possible thing you're going by.
I didn't mention rings, so I don't know why you're.
But I thought you just confirmed you're going by rings as not end all be all.
Right, they're not. You could say, though, that a player's success in any fashion is part of why you could say that they're dominant.
So I got that. So can we agree that since rings are part of your criteria, that I am not wrong to take a guess that you're partly going by rings?
I wouldn't say it's part of my criteria. I would say it's something you can put into the pool of argument to say that this player was good.
Wait, it's not part of your criteria?
You see criteria is that you have to have it. You don't necessarily have to have it.
So look, talk about straw manning and word games. I mean, I'm just trying to understand. So rings is part of your thing. Whatever word you want to use, criteria, foundation, reasoning, whatever, it's there, right? Rings is there, right?
Having a ring would enhance your status.
Okay, so then back to square one. So will you admit that I was not wrong to assume, and I wasn't assuming because I knew what you meant, but I'll give you the benefit of doubt. Well, I was not wrong to assume that you are using rings. Yes?
You were wrong to assume that the argument I was making at that time was about rings because it was launched.
Okay, so you're talking about wins and losses, but not rings as part of the wins and losses.
As far as team success, if you are a losing team, I don't consider a player to really be that dominant.
And what is your definition of a losing team? What is your definition of a losing team?
A team that doesn't win even half their games.
Okay, so that's your random criteria that you came up with, and that's okay. We'll go with that. So I don't think I was wrong to, at that time, as you said, to put rings as part of it, because your whole topic when we're talking about this, when we were talking about wins and losses and impact of a player and teams winning, you know, how they do and all that, rings was part of it. I don't think it's wrong for me to go to rings. Now, if you're going to say to me you don't want rings now, okay, that's fine, but I think that's silly that you want to throw out rings at that time. I think you're just saying that because you don't want to admit that you're wrong. That's what I think happened.
I don't think you're right about this either, so we can...
Well, you haven't shown it to me. You're talking about players having wins and losses like this is a team game, and you're talking about individual players having wins and losses. Are you listening to yourself?
Yeah, because it matters. Their impact matters. If you're actually trying to make the argument that if a player, no matter how good they are, does not impact the win-loss column.
Of course, that's not what I'm saying. Of course not. Of course, I'm not saying that. Every star player impacts their team in a positive way. As I said to you earlier, how many players can you think of that didn't impact their team in a positive way? What I'm saying is, a guy doesn't win and lose. You're putting it on a guy for winning and losing. That's silly.
How is it silly?
Because one guy doesn't win and lose. It's a team game, as you agree sometimes.
No, then it's not a team game. But I'm saying, so you're saying that if you put the greatest, what you consider to be the greatest player in the league on a team, and they win less games, you don't think that means anything?
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying I don't give players wins and losses.
So it just seems, I don't understand. Like, it seems to me that your argument is that no matter how good or bad a player is, it doesn't affect the win column.
No, again, you're not listening. I'm not saying impact doesn't make a difference. Players impact teams. I'm saying to you, I don't say I'm going to rank this guy over this guy because his team won more or lost less.
Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say we have a team that has won 30 games in a season. You add a player who scores 28 points a game. They go on this team, they score 28 points a game, but they still win 30 games. Okay. What was the point?
Are you disagreeing with yourself when you acknowledge other factors play a role?
I'm not disagreeing. This is literally my argument. I'm saying that I don't think a player, just because they score a lot of points, happens to be an impactful, dominant player.
Okay, well, you know what? I'll tell you what, man. I will have an open mind. If you're making that case, you'd have to prove it to me. Can you prove this to me that one guy, he's to blame or he should be the reason they won?
Well, that's the thing. Is what you're doing is you're setting up an example to where nobody can ever prove.
You're doing that thing where you want to point the finger at me. I'm just following up to your points. If you don't like my follow-ups, don't bring up these points.
What I'm pointing the finger at is if I were to ask you to do the exact opposite, you couldn't make the same. You could not prove it either.
What's the opposite? Just to make sure, what's the opposite? What's the opposite?
Okay, the opposite. So my point is saying, if you have a player who's supposed to be a dominant good player, I think that if you put a player on a team who was not doing well, and that they perform better, you could say, well, look, this player has enhanced and brought this team up.
You're not understanding. You're still not understanding. I never said to you players don't impact their team in a positive way. You're not understanding what I'm saying. I agree with you that when you get Michael Jordan and you get Larry Bird and you get Magic Johnson, you're a better player. You're a better team. My thing to you is you're giving them wins and losses. You're saying this guy is better than that guy or this guy is better than those guys based on wins and losses. That's silly. That's ridiculous.
I'm saying that wins and losses are a good indicator of whether or not a player is his dominance.
It's not golf. It's not boxing. It's not wrestling. It's not one-on-one tennis. It's a team game.
I know it is. We've never disagreed on that. I've never said it wasn't.
No, but I know that. You acknowledge the other things that happen when a team wins and loses, but you play both sides of the fence, and then when I ask you about this, you say, I'm not playing both sides, you're straw-manning me.
I said you were strawmanning me because you brought up rings when I ever mentioned rings.
Well, I didn't say you did. Again, we're going back to no. You did mention rings when you go by wins and losses, and you go by impacting a win, and you go by and you did talk about rings and winning. There's nothing wrong with me bringing up rings, especially when you confirm that rings is part of your criteria. It's not the end all. It's not the end all be all, as you said. But let's go back to impact. Let's go back to stars impacting. I really want to understand where you're going with this. So other things play a role. We agree there. So we don't have to debate that. Why do you give them wins and losses? How does a guy win and lose by himself?
I didn't say a guy wins and loses by himself.
It's his wins and loss.
If you add a player to a team and he does whatever stats he does, and it does not affect the win-loss column, what good do they do?
Okay, but again, are you giving... Okay, let me make sure there's no misunderstanding. Are you giving, even though I already know the answer, I just want to make sure if you're going to acknowledge this. Are you giving the players wins and losses, or are you giving the teams wins and losses?
The teams wins and losses.
Okay, so if it's a team thing, why are you putting it on a star for winning and losing?
What are you talking about? If you add a talent to the team, are you saying they don't impact the win-loss column?
You keep going back to impact. Do you know what I'm going to say for impact? I never said to you players don't impact their teams positively or negatively for that matter. I'm saying to you they're not the reason they won and they're not the reason they lost.
Okay.
Why is it hard for you to accept? I don't understand.
I don't agree with that.
No, this is not an opinion.
No impact on why they win or lose.
No, it's because other factors come into play. Michael Jordan in the 1980s. Michael Jordan in the remember I asked you earlier. I said if you really believe what you want, if you believe, you're going to have to prove it to me. And you said to me, well, you're basic. I don't have your exact words. Don't quote me, okay? But you said something like, I'm being unfair and putting you into a corner, and you could ask me the same question. I wouldn't have an answer. You're not proving to me why you're right. You're just saying I disagree. That's not proving it to me.
That's because what you're asking to prove cannot be, there's no physical way to prove it.
Okay, just so like then if it's not provable, okay, I got you. So if it's not,
you're talking about such a nebulous thing, and there's no way to prove it.
Oh, actually, there are ways to go over this, and I'm going to actually answer your question and show you how I can prove it. But if you make a claim and you cannot prove it, why would you then say, well, I don't agree with you? Why would you disagree with me? You're not proving your case then.
Because you're not proving your case in the opposite either.
But you're the one. You're the one making. You're making the claim. You're saying it's a guy. You're putting him a record. What? It's up to you to prove it, not up to me.
Yeah, a player impacts the game. Yes, if they do not add wins and losses to a team, when they were added to it, then they have not been
okay. So would you mind proving that? Would you mind proving to me about wins and losses for a guy? Prove it to me.
What do you want me to prove exactly?
Your own case. This is your case. Why are you asking me? Prove to me one guy wins and loses.
My case is that if a player is indeed great, if he is added to a team, then especially unless the team's already doing extremely well, then you could say that maybe you're not going to add wins to it. But if you add a player to a team and the team's outcome doesn't change, then it's hard to say. All right.
So since you're not going to prove it to me, let's try this. We know there's star players out there who do lots of things. Well, hang on. Relax. Let's just go over what happened. We know there's players out there. Hang on. We know there's players out there who are great players, and some of them win more games. Some of them might win the same games, and some of them might win less games, and so on. So what do you do with that?
I don't know what you expect. What would prove it to you? What are you asking?
Again, I'm asking you a question. We know there's players out there who do really good in a game, and sometimes their teams win more, sometimes their teams win less, sometimes they win the same amount of games or whatever. So what do you do with that?
I don't know what you're asking.
If you're talking about impact leading to wins and losses, the records, and how to rank them and all that, and I'm showing you that there's players out there who come to a team, and sometimes they win more, sometimes they win less, sometimes they win the same amount or whatever. How do you figure out this whole thing about who's better?
You look at their career as a total.
Okay, but the teams are not the same. Dude, the teams are not the same every year. You're comparing. Why would you compare Allen Iverson to go by the guy you brought up, Allen Iverson? Why would you compare Allen Iverson's wins and losses to Michael Jordan's? He had a different team.
Why wouldn't I?
Because he had a different team. I don't think you're listening, man.
What you're saying is that you. So I see what you're saying. So what is your criteria then for a great player?
Again, you've been doing this a lot. I ask you a question, you put it back to me. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm not going to duck and dodge. I will answer your questions, but I know two things are going to happen. You're not going to agree with me anyway, and two, you're getting the light off of you. You make a claim. Why don't you back it up?
That's what you're doing, though. See, I've already done it. I've already explained to you my opinion.
Look. If I told you the Earth is flat, that's a cop out. Just because you say things doesn't mean you proved anything. I keep asking you specific questions, and you won't answer my questions. So let's try this again. Allen Iverson has a different team than Michael Jordan. You know he has a different team. You know it's not the same every year. You know a lot of other factors come into play. Great, we're on the same page. Now I'm going to ask you something. Why would you compare wins and losses when the situations are different?
Because if you look at the NBA history as a whole, and you look at players do people consider to be great, how many of those are players that have had careers?
You're talking about what people think now?
What the argument is it not?
I'm not asking you about. I'm not asking you about the world. I'm not asking about the world. I'm asking about you. People are idiots and they think all sorts of things. Why don't we go by what you think?
I think a player such as Allen Iverson or Gilbert Arenas or any other player that's not very good defensively but happens to score a lot, they're not that good because they're not leading to a bunch of wins. Because their game does not lead to, it does not match with the NBA style in creating a team that wins a lot of games.
Okay, so what if we find another player who's better than them, and then they don't win that much? Then what?
Then it depends. What depends what the player is and what the situation is.
Okay, so then I agree with you. It does. I agree with you. It does depend. We are 100% on the same page, and that's why I'm saying you're playing both sides. You say on the one hand it depends on a number of things, and you're right. And then when we get to the nitty gritty of it, you put it back on the guy.
Okay, we'll go back to the guy then. The reason I'm putting it on the guy is my argument, my contention is a player who I consider to be great, that has a talent and skill style that leads to wins because of their style. Because ultimately, if you're playing NBA basketball, what's the point of the game?
For the team to win, not for the individual to win.
It's for the team to win. So to me, my contention is, I would consider a player who is great is a player whom wins, who both does a lot on the court. Statistics do matter, but they also off court too. The coaching staff matters, yes. But as far as the specific player goes, my contention is that if a player is great, they have to be leading the team to getting wins.
Okay, and that sounds great. How do you lead a team to win? How do you lead a team to win if the team is not good enough to win? Oh, dude, no, come on, dude, one thing at a time. Don't play victim. One thing at a time. How do you lead it? How do you play? No, you played victim quite a few. You played a victim a few times.
I'm not playing victim.
Anyway, how do you lead a team to win if the team is not good enough to win? How do you do that?
It takes time.
Okay, how do you do? Dude, I'm just asking questions. Let's say you had. Do you need me to list you stars who do a lot and they don't win? Do you need me to list you stars?
It doesn't matter. You can nitpick and cherry pick a bunch of different examples, and I can cherry pick examples.
Right, but do you know what the difference is? When I cherry pick my examples, they're all based on the same thing happening. You're going by different things and lumping it all together as it's the same thing every time.
What different things am I going by?
Well, again, I thought we agreed. A lot of other factors come into play on why a team wins and loses. Do you want me to start listing some factors again?
Because there's not one factor. Right. I've never said that there was.
I know you didn't. But you jump ship. You go to, I know other things happen, but let's put it on a guy for winning and losing.
That's why we can't come to an agreement on something. For you seem to take any stance that it has to be a bipolar stance, that it has to be...
Bipolar stance. Are you listening to yourself? Now you're saying it's a bipolar stance. It's not a bipolar stance, first of all, but if anyone's having a bipolar stance, it's you. I have not only been consistent, but I haven't even told you a lot of things that I think, so you can't even tell me it's a bipolar stance. You have been bringing up a lot of things, and you play both sides of the fence. You're not consistent in your own take.
You're trying to claim to me that if I have a particular stance, that it cannot be centrist in nature, it must be way one direction, and it's not. You're claiming.
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm telling you, I'm not saying that. I'm telling you, I'm not saying that. No, you took it the wrong way. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. No, I know it doesn't make sense to you because the reason it doesn't make sense to you, and this is why I had clues. You are no doubt a typical Michael Jordan fan, no doubt about it. All your takes, every take you have told me on this phone call is hook, line, sinker that a typical Michael Jordan fan would take. I haven't gotten one take from you that was different from any other Michael Jordan fan.
My argument was not even for Michael Jordan. I haven't even started on Michael Jordan.
And I know, I can only imagine how worse it gets. I can only imagine. But so far, based on what you've told me so far, it's all going to help Michael Jordan. And it's the kind of take that nobody else has. I've never met a Larry Bird fan or a Jerry West fan or Elgin Baylor fan or anybody else ever tell me about players' wins and losses. And when they do, if you want to talk about Kareem 6 rings and Bill Russell 11 rings, when they do go by wins and losses, they're only doing it because they're reacting to you Michael Jordan fans who go by wins and losses.
I can't really speak to what Kareem and those fans do. They're usually quite easy to talk to, so I don't know.
Well, they're actually very easy to talk to. You're right, but I'm telling. Remember when you said earlier? I don't remember if you told me this. You told me this off the air. Never mind. I don't want to be unfair and bring that up. Never mind. Okay, so let's go back to this again. I'm trying to understand. There's players who dominate a game offensively, defensively, rebounding, and all that, and they don't win. And then there's others who do win. How do you explain that?
Very rare, but yes.
It's not rare. Every year you can only have one winner.
Well, here's the thing. If you're on a team...
There's more losers than there are winners.
Right. No, it's exactly the same, actually.
No, every year you can only have one winner. Every year there's more losers than winners.
Oh, you're talking about rings again.
No, I'm talking about both. Dude, see, I think part of the problem is you don't understand my argument. I'm not talking about rings only. I'm talking about anything you define as winning and losing. It could be preseason, regular season, playoffs, finals. You're only going to have one winner. Everyone else loses.
Each game, you mean?
Again, it could be preseason, regular season, playoffs, or whatever. Anytime you have wins and losses, there can only be one winner. Everybody else will lose.
You talked about the entire season, then.
Okay, all right. I'm making it as clear as possible. But anyway, let's just get past. I don't think you get what I'm saying. Let's just get past this. So, how does a player, if a player does good, if a player has the statistics to back it up, and he's an all-around player and he loses, why is that his fault?
What is the winner of a preseason? What does that mean?
Well, I was just making a joke. Obviously, I'm not really serious about preseason. But if you want, we'll get into preseason. I'll get into that. In a preseason game, obviously they still count wins and losses. You know.
So game to game, one team is a winner, one team's a loser. That's what you're saying.
Right. Every team wins and every team loses. I mean, once in a while they might have a tie and they have to do like a rain delay or reschedule or something. But it's usually one winner, one loser.
Right.
Okay. So if a player does well, he gets whatever your criteria is: points, rebounds, steals, whatever. He's doing what he's supposed to do. If his team wins, why does he get the credit? And if his team loses, why does he get the blame? The wins and losses.
Are you asking me why the media would give credit?
No, I already know why the media does it. I'm asking about you, man.
For me, again, as I alluded to earlier, if a player is given a large amount of money or is a high draft pick and they're carrying a large amount of the load in basketball, for example.
I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're saying. Carrying a lot of the load? What does that mean?
Yeah, carrying the load. Like if you're handling the basketball a lot, your usage percentage is high. You're shooting most of the shots.
No, that's ridiculous. What about rebounding? What about steals? What about blocks? What about free throw percentage? What about minutes played? Games played?
You have to allow me to finish my point. And cut me off.
I'm going to cut you off if you say you're saying a bunch of things. So you have to let me address one thing at a time. I know you didn't finish your other points, but you finished one point at least. How does a guy carry a load? It doesn't make any sense.
It does make sense. If you're defending the greatest player on the other team and you're scoring the most points for your team, you're carrying the load there.
No, you're not. No, because again, and you're not listening. Again, you're not. And this is what talking because you're not listening. I said it earlier. Rebounding, steals, assists, field goal percentage, games played, minutes played. Those are part of the load. You're talking about what every Michael Jordan fan talks about: offense and steals.
I didn't even mention steals. What the fuck are you talking about?
Well, don't get mad. Don't get mad. Relax. Like, you keep getting annoyed over and over like a little girl. Relax. You don't have to. Just because you're losing doesn't mean you have to get mad again. So okay. Anyway, look. When we play this tape, no one's going to side with you except some scumbag Michael Jordan fans, right? Anyway, I know you didn't say steal. I know you didn't say steal. I know you didn't say steals. I know you didn't say steals. Relax. I'm going to explain this to you. The reason I said steals is because you had two things. You talked about scoring and you talked about defense. Now, scoring and defense are not.
I never got to finish. Rebounding matters. Passing matters. Defense matters.
Okay. First of all, don't say you didn't. Don't say you didn't finish, because when I heard you talking earlier about carrying a load, I waited to make sure what you meant by load, and when you went to a new thing, that's when I interrupted. You said rebounds, blocks, steals, and all that. You didn't bring up all the other stuff. You clearly said points, and I think you said defense. But anyway, let's just get back to it. Okay. So what do you mean by carrying a load? So points and what else?
So you want me to start over?
No, I want you to say nothing. Of course I want you to start over, Your Majesty.
Jesus Christ.
Dude, don't get mad because you're making a fool of yourself, seriously.
I'm not making it. You keep storming. You keep.
No, I'm not. I'm literally. You're playing victim. I'm literally addressing your points and answering your questions. I'm trying to understand where you're going with this. The problem is, I'll tell you what the real problem is. You didn't think of this through. You didn't think of this through detailed, and you know you're being inconsistent. But you're too prideful to admit that maybe you're wrong, and you're stuck in your ways. I haven't told you hardly anything about what I think, so you can't even say that I'm bipolar. Like you're being bipolar. Now let's just try this again, man. Let's just relax and try this again. Relax. Let's have some Gatorade. Let's relax. So what's carrying the load? What's carrying the load? What is it?
I'm going to bring up seals.
I've already addressed this. You want to go back? Now, do you want me to repeat myself?
Why did you say that I brought up seals?
All right. Anyway, all right. So you don't want to answer the question. Do you want to tell me what's the load? What is the load?
want you to address why you said that I said.
I did address it. Do you want me to repeat myself?
Yes. Why
Okay.
did you say
So
that
why
I
is
said
it okay? Why is it not okay when I ask you to repeat something, but it's okay for you to ask when I repeat something?
I'll repeat it. I just want you to answer this first.
Okay.
So
No. I'm asking you a question. When I asked you earlier, when I asked you, can you tell me the load? You said to me, do you want me to repeat myself? So now you're asking me something. So I'm going to say the same thing to you. Do you want me to repeat myself?
Explain to me why you said that.
Do you want me to repeat myself?
We're just going to be just going in circles now.
Okay, well, this is what happens when you don't make a case of why you're right and you go in circles. I'm only following up to your points. I'm actually, by the way, just so you know, I'm actually not going in circles. I'm actually just going by what you bring up. You're going in circles. I'm following up. So let's try this again. Let's try this. Let's try this again. I'm asking, and I was asking you a million times, what is the load? Since you want to clarify again, what's the load?
Again, you're doing.
The reason you don't want to tell me what the load is, I'll tell you why. Because you know, if you start saying points, rebounds, steals, blocks, assists, everything that they do in a game, you know there's plenty of players who do a lot of things, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose.
What does that have to do with the loads?
What was that?
What does that have to do with what you just said?
That's what I'm saying. The point. Remember, the point was carrying a load. Do you even know what your point is anymore? Your point to me was players carry a load, and you're going to how they impact a team and how they win and how they lose. And I'm saying to you, there's lots of players who bring a lot to the table, and sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. How do you explain that?
Which, first of all, it's something I never disagreed with.
I can't believe you said that. You're just playing both sides of the fence again. Unbelievable, man.
We never did. You're talking about every player.
You never disagreed. You never disagreed about players who bring a lot to the table and sometimes they lose.
What?
If you're saying to me, if you're saying to me you never disagreed, I agree with you. I agree with you, dude. I agree with you. I agree. You didn't disagree on that, but you jump ship and you put it on a player for winning and losing.
No, look. The original subject, in case you forgot, is what makes a player considered to be great, in my opinion. And to me, that was part of it.
And I did. You know, that's another thing I find annoying about you. Every time we go in a circle, you have to say to me, well, you know what? The original question was this. The original topic was that, as if I'm going to a different path. I know what the topic in question was. I'm going by what you say. You bring up something and I follow up to it. So stop telling me what the original question was and the original topic was. We know what the original question was and we know what the original topic was. Let's just go back to the topic. So the topic is one guy wins and losses. I'd like to know if a player is carrying a load or doing a bunch of things, scoring and all that, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. How do you explain that?
I don't know what this is something we've already talked about. There's other factors. We already agreed on that.
Okay, great. So if we know there's other factors, why are you then jumping ship and going about wins and losses?
I'm not jumping ship because if you would have listened to my arguments instead of thinking that I'm every other Jordan fan, which I am not,
you are.
You would understand.
And I am listening to you. You're not listening to me.
You will notice. What's that?
No, you are a Michael Jordan fan, and I am listening to you, and you're not listening to me. I'm literally this whole topic has basically been you making a point and me following up. I'm following up to your point.
You're not following me. So
no, I'm following you. You're not following me. And basketball, no one ever said Jerry West was better than Elgin Baylor because he has one more ring. Nobody ever said Magic Johnson was better than Larry Bird at that time because of rings. What happened as time passed, it became a thing from the media and the fans where they started saying, who's better? Well, let's go by the rings. And then they transferred it to football now where they started saying, who's a better quarterback? Is Tom Brady the greatest? Who has more Super Bowl rings and all that? You know who did all this? It's you Michael Jordan fans who did all this.
But here's the thing, you keep putting me in a Michael. I'm not even a Jordan fan, dude. I'm a Spurs fan, actually.
Okay, so that's actually you're not going to like this answer. That's actually another reason I know you're a Michael Jordan fan because hear me out on this, okay? I know you're not going to like this answer, but hear me out. You guys are always a lot of you guys are always trying to convince people that you're not Michael Jordan fans. You have your own definition of what it means to be a Michael Jordan fan.
I'm not ranking anybody off wins and losses. We're talking about who's greater
You're not?
or what makes a great player.
You're not
And I'm
rank.
saying,
You're
well,
not ranking. Now I'm surprised. Did we just waste over an hour for nothing? You're not ranking players based off wins and losses?
What makes a dominant player, wins and losses is a factor in that. I'm not ranking them.
Hey, please subscribe. And if you disagree with me on something, you can go on my program and show me your facts on whatever you disagree on. If you want to go on, let's set it up. Send me an email. The email is right there in the description section. Thank you.